Well, hello and welcome on this Remembrance Eve to Paul Smith in Mayfair. My name is Genevieve Gaunt, and in collaboration with Paul Smith and A Rabbit's Foot, the film and culture magazine, it is my delight to be interviewing the magazine's founder, Charles Finch. A quintessential Londoner and Hollywood impresario, the texture of Charles Finch's life is woven from the silver threads of film, fashion, stars, and style. A life of pedigree, but not of a silver spoon. Charles is the grandson of an Alpine legend and groundbreaking chemist called George Ingle Finch, and the son of actors Peter Finch and Yolanda Turnbull. After Gordonston, he went to New York and studied under Lee Strasberg at the Actors School, and then went to Hollywood, seeking his fortune, directing and writing his first film at the age of 24. 23, even more precocious. After directing, writing, and acting a string of pictures, at age 30, he pivoted and became an agent at William Morris, and since then has produced about 25 movies. But there is an olive in this martini missing. Parties. In 1984, Charles Finch threw... Which I hate, by the way. Well, we'll get on to that. He threw an impromptu party in 1984 at Mr. Chow's restaurant in Hollywood. It was small, but legends such as Warren Beatty and Sharon Stone and Al Pacino turned up. And since then, for decades, Charles Finch and Chanel have hosted countless BAFTA and Oscar soirees so glamorous that, as Harper's Bazaar put it, even the stars get starstruck. A self-described creative entrepreneur, Charles founded Finch & Partners in 2000, Chuck's Restaurants, and the luxury shoe brand Équipement de Vie. In 2022, as many of the people here know, because they work here, he founded A Rabbit's Foot and recently A Rabbit's Foot Films, which has a first look deal with Sony's Columbia Pictures. As if all of that weren't enough, he also sits on the boards of Mubi and Assouline. With Assouline, he's published not one, but two books, The Night Before BAFTA in 2016, which his friend John Malkovich wrote a foreword to, and, which is fantastic because we are in Paul Smith talking about style, this year, in September, he published a book with Assouline called London Chic.
Their title, not my title. The chic bit,
All about style. We'll talk for 45 minutes and then open out to you for some audience questions. Please join me in welcoming Charles Finch. So, Charles, let's start at the beginning, because a lot of people, of course, know who your father was, the great actor Peter Finch, but I was most fascinated by learning about your grandfather and your entrepreneurial energy, grit, your love of style and fashion. It all seems to, and your love of the wild and sailing and the outdoors, it seems to have its DNA in your grandfather.
Yeah, my grandfather and my great-grandfather were and my great-uncle were incredible alpinists and explorers and sailors. My grandfather was a big sailor too. So it probably comes from that. So George Ingle Finch wrote a great book, which you should all run out and get if you can find it, called The Making of a Mountaineer, which is about the first ascent of Everest in 22, where actually for a long time he was the highest person on the planet. And then he came down carrying whatever. Anyway, he was a great alpinist and a fantastic soldier as well. Brought down a Zeppelin with a handgun, or actually with a flare gun, which is a famous story in the trenches. And to his credit, he also invented napalm, very important. Napalm, do you know what napalm is? It's a horrible, horrible thing, but anyway, he did invent it. As well as the first down-filled jacket, which he used on Everest. And actually, there was a piece in the Times a couple of days ago about a young group of climbers who went up, not Everest, but K2, or nearly summited K2, wearing the same equipment, which is wool, close to the body, and managed to really prove that actually you could also survive in those days without the modern technology we have today, which is very, very light. So it's heavier. So I guess from him, or from his spirit, climbing was always a very important part of my life, and then sailing. So yeah.
It is Remembrance Day today, and he served in the First World War.
Yes.
And in 1918, when the war ended, he received honours. Is that right?
Yeah. He was heavily decorated, as was my father's brother. Was probably one of the most decorated wing commanders in the Second World War. So we come from a mismatch of, we're a very ancient family. This is where I hope immediately I get made a lord. Whereas we're a very, very ancient sort of Viking family. Engel, Finch. The Finch were the Saxon beautiful women. The Engels were the raping, pillaging Vikings. And we came together, and so we've always been a family of outdoor men and wild men, fairly wild men.
You mentioned the eider-down jacket, but that's a revolutionary thing to invent. But did he get the credit that he deserved?
Yeah, he did actually. I mean, if you look at Remo, who bought Montclair and rebuilt the brand, he talks about the origins of the jacket. I mean, there's a chap called Eddie Bauer, who was an American entrepreneur, who then took this idea of filling nylon with goose down and using it for climbing. But my grandfather's real interest was using oxygen in a different way. So he created a portable cylinder to have oxygen, which was used at high altitude, which Hillary and Tenzing then used for their ascent and victory on Everest, the first time it was climbed. So he was a really interesting entrepreneur in that sense. He wasn't really interested in money. I'm not sure how interested in money I am either, but he also created a felt shoe, which was also used recently by these guys who went up the mountain, so that you'd have a felt shoe instead of, which you could put crampons on, like when you're fishing. And they used these very primitive sort of shoes with one ice pick to go up these mountains, which was extraordinary. So he was always, he's very sartorial, quite elegant. He was a pretty tough man, and as I say, interested always in mountains, as was his brother. So he and his brother grew up in Switzerland together, climbing. We were, I mean, I say this, and of course everybody's going to be horrified. We were a colonial family because they were sent to, my great-great-grandfather was sent to Australia, not as a criminal, although he probably was a criminal. And so they came from that world of kind of forging their way in the land, and then they based themselves in Switzerland, which is weird, and lived rather nicely in Switzerland so they could climb mountains. So they all of them would go up. My two great uncles, my great-grandfather, and my grandfather. And if you go to Zermatt, you'll see there are passes where they have these Finch passes in various different alpine places, and they really tested all the elements.
A few years ago, I think you said that maybe there was a biopic going to be made about him, and they were talking about Russell Crowe. And
yeah. It's still around. Doug Liman was meant to direct it. It was Russell Crowe. I can't remember who else. Russell Crowe was meant to play George. And so he was a very controversial figure. My grandmother, who was called Betty Staveley Hill, was a wild socialite in the 20s, and she had a great fondness for champagne and young men. And while he was in the trenches, she had too much champagne and probably too many young men. He came back, and my grandfather questioned whether or not my father or his brother were his sons, and actually abducted my father and sent him to my great aunt in Australia. So we've always, and because of that scandal, he was then banned from the expedition, which was the fatal expedition where Mallory then lost his life on Everest. So that scandal really stopped his climbing career for a while, and then he went on to be the president of the Alpine Club and wrote this extraordinary book, and at one point climbed more peaks than any human, and I think until fairly recently climbed more mountains than anyone else in history. And now you have these guys doing Everest in one day and doing all this stuff. One guy skied down Everest the other day. So that was very much in the spirit of the legend of the family, which was, anyway, there you go.
you mentioned your father. what was your childhood like? Because, I mean, people know of your father as a great actor, but I've been fascinated looking into your history and seeing everything so glamorous. But actually, you've had to overcome quite a lot, actually.
I mean, in comparative terms, you know, not compared to people who really have much more difficult childhoods than I had. I mean, I had a privileged family and, you know, great wealth in the family, so hardly compared to people who had much tougher times. Because that's a fact. I mean, the family was very wealthy, and there's no way of going around that. So my father and mother married. My mother was a very beautiful young woman he met in Africa on the beach, and they had this tumultuous, fabulous love affair. My father was you don't even know who he was, most of you young ones, but he was a matinee idol of the time, and he made all these extraordinary movies. And his best friends were O'Toole and Burton, who he loved, and they had this incredible free life compared to actors today. You know, they could really act and work and not be photographed and shamed for any of their bad behavior. So he had a fairly wild time, and he made some very important movies like Sunday Bloody Sunday, which was the first time a man kissed another man on screen. Worth watching if you haven't seen it. It's a powerful, powerful movie. And Far From the Madding Crowd, which I hope you've also seen, which was a beautiful film. And then, of course, he won the Oscar for Network. He's actually won 5 British Academy Awards, and he had 8, or I can't remember how many nominations for Oscars, and then won one when he died. And so my mother and my father divorced when I was very young. I was 4 years old, and I never saw my father again. And so he abandoned the family, as was often the practice in those days. The responsibility of parenthood was different from what it is today. Today we probably overdote. In those days, people definitely didn't do that. There was no doting in my family. And so they divorced when I was very young, if this is interesting, and I never saw him again. And I actually heard my father died in a taxi in Paris when I was 13 on the radio. So the destruction of the family was pretty intense from a very early age. And then my mother had been cut off from her family for marrying an actor, and an actor who had some Australian connections. Often people say, you know, Peter Finch is Australian. He wasn't Australian at all. But the family had land there, and he was sent there as a young boy when my grandfather believed that he should be separated from this woman that he no longer loved. So at that point, as you say, at that point life changed, and it was fairly difficult.
As I said, you went to New York, you studied under Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio, then you went to Los Angeles. Like, what was that? What was your first job? Like, where did you live in LA? Like, how did that kick off?
Well, I realized after I did a sort of parachute training course after Gordonson, that I was really a softie, actually, and I really liked luxury. and so the idea of serving in that sense was probably not for me. And then I came down to London, and I got a job very briefly in the city, you know, at a stockbroking firm somewhat related to people that we knew, and lasted 6 months there, and then I became a nightclub bouncer. I was very good at a place called Tokyo Joe's around the corner from here, and I was a really good nightclub bouncer. So it was a very exclusive club, and it was like a sort of Annabelle's. Annabelle's, of course, existed then, but it was like a version of Annabelle's. And you couldn't get in, you had to be a member. But of course, if I was on the door, things could be arranged. So I made quite a lot of money at the door, and I brought 2 of my friends from the Royal Marines, came down and were co-bouncers with me, Rod Jones and a few other people, and we all made a lot of money. And then, of course, it was discovered that we were taking this money at the door, and we were booted out. And then I sort of thought, okay, what I really want to do is, it was sort of stronger than me. I mean, it was really stronger than me. I wanted to be in film somehow. And I got an interview with David Putnam, which is not in the brief, but it should be, because I love David Putnam, actually. I haven't seen him for a while. But
In my brief, it should have been.
Yeah, it should
Oh,
be.
I'm so sorry.
And David Putnam was a big producer, and I got a meeting with him, and using the family name, of course, and he was making a movie called Local Hero. And so I said, look, I'll do anything. I became his third assistant. And my job was, get tea, amuse Burt Lancaster and his wife, and feed people. And that's how my career in the movie business started. And as I was there, I started to write and wrote a story or two. And Putnam essentially gave me a job, gave me an opportunity, a lifeline, and said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, maybe I'd like to act and write. And I wrote to the Strasberg School in New York because I'd heard of method and winged my way to New York somehow and got an interview with Lee and went to acting school.
What was your first ever screenplay?
It was called Wake Me When It Thunders. And it was a really grim, about a true story about a kid who had been falsely accused of rape, and he was hung by his. It's actually a true story. He was hung by his cell. They had a mock trial in his cell, and they hung him. And so it's a story. It's his story, and the court case afterwards. I mean, this was the time of, Equus and all these sort of quite strong social pieces. And so, of course, I wanted to write my version of Equus, and a woman optioned the play, so I was always writing. Funny enough, it's like my personal survival mechanism is to write. Worst comes to worst, I'll always figure out a way of writing myself out of hell, and that was always the method that's how I started in Hollywood, writing scripts, and I realized I wasn't really an actor pretty quickly into the whole experience.
When you first landed in LA, where did you stay?
The first place of course, I had been to Los Angeles with my mother at one point before there, so it wasn't completely a sort of, completely a new place. I had been there, so I knew the Chateau Marmont existed, and so I headed to the Chateau Marmont. I had like $300 or $400, and there was an amazing woman who ran the chateau, and her name was Sheila, and she literally dominated it. And I went to meet her, and she was a marvelous Indian lady, beautiful Indian lady. And I said, look, I've got $300. How long will that buy me? And she said, probably 24 hours. and I made a deal with her with $50 a night. I could do 3 nights and have food for 3 days. And on my first night, I went to the bar downstairs in the Chateau Marmont, which is a tiny room, and I met a producer called Noel Marshall. And Noel Marshall had produced The Exorcist. He was a very, very strange but kind man. And he said, what are you doing here, kid? And I said, well, I wrote a movie, play, and trying to, I'd like to be here, and I'd like to learn how to make movies. And he said, okay, well, I'll give you a job. And he said, come to my house tomorrow. And I was very excited. I went to see Sheila. I said, look, I've been offered this job. This guy isn't like, kinky or anything like that. And she said, no, he's married to Tippi Hedren, and you should go see him. And I had bought with $65 a down payment on a white Volkswagen Beetle called Myrtle, and the license plate was Myrtle. And I bought this fantastic, the best car I ever had. I loved that car. And I bought it, and I had to then make 4 other payments of $65, and at the end of it, I'd had to pay $800. So I knew I could at least, the first time and not the last time in my life, I was buying things on the drip. So I bought this car, parked it outside the Chateau Marmont on the hill behind, and the next morning I went down there again in the car to go and see Noel Marshall and Tippi Hedren, and somebody had stolen the roof of the car. They'd kind of unscrewed the Volkswagen, the roof of the Volkswagen convertible. And so I drove up to his house, got to the top of Mulholland Drive. I don't know if you know Los Angeles, but it's quite a drive up from Chateau Marmont. And I came to this big gated property, which was like wire meshed with a lot of lights and sort of lamps on the property, and it was like a prison camp. I rang the bell, and houseman or housekeeper said, okay, you're in the right place. Don't leave the car. Drive up and we'll come and get you. Okay. And so the gate opened like that, and then you came into another thing, and then another gate opened after the one behind you closed. So I thought, oh my God, where am I going here? I was a bit nervous, and I drove up to this ranch house. There was kind of wild ranch house, something really extraordinary, in the sense that it was simple but seemed to go on forever. And I sat in the car thinking, well, they have big dogs. And as I sat in the car, I could hear sort of the bushes moving around me and sort of strange murmuring sounds. And I was quite intimidated. I was very young. I was, 19 years old, something 20 years old. And then as I was looking, I saw this big shadow come out of the bushes, and it was the biggest lion you've ever seen in your life. Enormous, enormous lion. And the lion came to the car and kind of, it was Elsa from Born Free, literally, and kind of leant against the car, and then Elsa's friend came and leant against the car, and they kept lions in their house. They'd made a movie called Roar, and they were surrounded by lions, this enormous family, this pride of lions. And I was there with no roof. And I was like, this is not going to end well. This is not going to go my way. And so anyway, cut a long story short, he came out and she came out, and then we had this interview in their sitting room, all these old leather sofas, with these lions walking around in the house. And I got a job, $500 a week, and I started my movie career.
But you eventually did have a roof over your head. You shared a house in LA with some...
I lived in many, many places. I never had any money at all. And, there is something in this story which we've sort of missed. So when my mother and father got married, they found this island called Jamaica. And my mother and father built a little house and a little farm in a place called Bamboo, which is in Santana, and that was my home. So every time things got tough in my life, I would figure out a way of getting back to Jamaica. So I had quite a, I know this sounds like a completely non sequitur, but I had quite a solid sort of, there was one place I felt was really home. So everywhere else didn't matter to me because I always felt I could go back to the Caribbean. That in my heart, I had two real compasses. Jamaica, I'm not really a Londoner. Jamaica and was in my soul. And so that was an important note, just if any of you are interested. So Los Angeles was for me like, all right, but my home is over there and I can go there. So I found a friend of mine called Damien Harris, whose father was Richard Harris, who'd been a very good friend of my dad's, and they were both crazy, wild actors. And Damien I'd known since I was a child, and he said, come and live in my house. And in his house, he had 10 people living there. 10 other people, Julian Sands, Rupert Everett, a whole bunch of people, a whole bunch of actors and directors, and we had an amazing, amazing time. No money. So basically, we would do all sorts of scams to get paid. We'd like sell other people our ideas, and they would sell them on to studios and pay us $500. I mean, some people would pay me like $800 to write an entire script while I had my day job of $500. So I went through that whole process. And we lived as a community of young artists. So if any of you are young artists, I encourage you to be with your peers.
That's a house full of Brits. Am I right in thinking you
There were one or two Americans. There were like, there was one or two Americans, yeah.
James Spader?
Jimmy Spader, John Malkovich. And so I figured so I had the day job with $500, so I had to pay $200 of that to Damien. And then I had to pay $100 for the car, and the rest, so I got a job cooking for people as well. And as I didn't know really how to cook, it was interesting. But it seemed all okay, because what America gives you, or used to give you, first of all, Los Angeles, California is amazing. It's a great place, a great state. First of all, it was really, anything was possible, and everybody was in the same position, and you could be in the sun. Whereas here, I think it's harder.
What did you cook for people? What was your
couscous?
Couscous? Just couscous?
Always couscous.
Just couscous by itself?
What would you like for dinner? Couscous? can you cook anything else? I can do dry couscous, I can do wet couscous, or vegetable couscous. Yeah.
Linking food and scripts and being entrepreneurial, am I right in thinking there was some kind of writing relationship with Mr. Chow?
Yeah, well, so as I say, I was literally game, for anything to survive. My mum was also broke, so she had moved to California as well, and she wanted to be a screenwriter, and she was really broke too. So anything we could, we would literally collect coins because it was fucking broke all the time, and it was a really dominant
driving force. Yeah, really hard. She was such a beautiful woman. And you have her with you all the time on your desk. Is that right? You have the Chanel No. 5 on your desk.
Always makes me very sad.
Yeah. I know
that struggle.
I know that on her deathbed, she asked you to kind of hold 3 wishes, and one of them was to write a screenplay together.
Yeah, we wrote a few movies together. We wrote, so she was a really good writer, much better writer than I was. Unfortunately, she was a bit too fond of booze and pills and stuff like that. But so she had a very tough life, a really tough life. And so we wrote a movie together which was called Bad Girls, which is, you could all go and see. Funnily enough, I got an email the other day from somebody who wants to remake Bad Girls. So we made this movie. It was a female Western, and it was Mary Stuart Masterson, Drew Barrymore, Andy McDowell, and Madeline Stowe, young director who was fired pretty quickly. And we managed to sell it to Fox, and we made that movie and another couple of movies. And it did quite well. At the time, it made about 60 million at the box office, which was, in those days, it was kind of a big deal. But not so much anymore, but in those days, it was a big deal.
Your mother has been, from my humble perspective, a beautiful and driving force in your film career. Can you tell us about the link between Chanel, your mother, and making the movie with Sharon Stone?
Yes. To escape from a brand for a second. How marvelous that would be. So my first film was called Priceless Beauty as a director. So I directed 3 movies. And for many, many years, I said to everybody, and I know this is going to be broadcast all over the place, apparently. So I used to say to people, listen, I made 3 of the worst movies ever made, Priceless Beauty, Where Sleeping Dogs Lie, and my last one, which I was also in, called Never Ever. But actually, as I've gotten older and I see the work that people put out now, I think actually the movies were not so bad. And actually, I think we have this way of putting ourselves down, especially if we're Anglo-Saxon. And whereas Americans will tell you, it's the best movie ever made. You got to see my movie. It's so great. And we tend to put ourselves down. So my first movie I made in Italy, I'd gotten jobs in Hollywood as a writer. So I got jobs as a writer, kept me alive, and then I wrote movies for lots and lots of people. And I'd written a series of movies called The Dentist 1, The Dentist 2, and The Dentist 3. I think I was like 22, and they were really, really bad. But I got paid quite well, and they were quite successful. So all of a sudden, I kept getting called by these kind of famous producers about, hey, you wrote The Dentist? What a fucking crazy idea is that? And do you want to write the doctor? And I was like, do you want to write the sister and the nurse? And it's like I could never get away from the horror medical genre for 2 years. People kept, and I'd say, yeah, and I just wrote all this shit. And then I wrote a rather beautiful story about a man who gives up on life and he meets a genie that comes out of a vase. And I sent it to this guy, Christopher Lambert, who was a big star at the time. He'd made Greystoke and Subway, and he was kind of a big deal. And he said, I'll do the movie. And so I set this movie up with Diane Lane as the. So that was the first movie, and made it in Italy. And it was kind of crazy movie, and it was a flop. And then the set went to Cannes. Everybody ran ran away. I was so young, I was like 22 years old, literally 23 years old. And the second movie I made, it was called Where Sleeping Dogs Lie, and was about a writer, Dylan McDermott, who actually finds a house, and he becomes a squatter in the house, and the house has another squatter, and the squatter's a serial killer. It's about their relationship. And the writer's so desperate to write something that would be a bestseller that he begins to write the story of his roommate who's a killer. And there was an actress who was doing pretty well called Sharon Stone, and she'd made this movie that was in the can, hadn't come out yet, and she was fine on the eye, and she had something very fierce about her, and so I cast her, but I needed to dress her, and we had no money to make the movie. I think we made the movie for like $800,000. Which even at that time was a little bit of cash, and rusting around the place trying to find cash. I was on a plane. For some reason, it was weird, like Austria, or I can't remember where I was going, and in front of me was Karl Lagerfeld and his entourage. And I figured he was somebody famous because, you'd read these things about Karl Lagerfeld, and he was going to Chanel and all this stuff, and I tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Listen, Mr. Lagerfeld, I think my mother used to be a big client of Chanel's, and
Here.
And would you dress this actress in my movie?" And he was so kind of open, Karl. He was a very open guy, and he was sort of intrigued, and he said, "Yeah, okay. Call my office," gave me a card, and he gave the clothes for the movie, which Sharon Stone, if you watch the movie, Sharon Stone swathed in Chanel and gave us all. That's how this relationship started. And then as I did more films and more things, I would go and see every now and then him in Paris and say, "Look, I'm doing this, and do that." And he was pretty reluctant after the first movie, after the second movie. But that's how the relationship started. Mm-hmm. And then I made the third movie, which was called Never Ever, which I'm also in the movie. I'm not a very good actor, but it was a hell of a good time because I fell in love with the leading lady, Sandrine Bonnaire. And I realized after that movie, which opened the Toronto Film Festival to disastrous reviews, that maybe I shouldn't do this anymore. And again, this is a mistake. For those of you listening to this, hearing this, actually keep going, because a lot of great directors have made lots of bad movies. I don't know if you've seen Rebecca Miller's documentary about Martin Scorsese. It's unbelievable. It's a great documentary. And Scorsese talks about failure, talks about the movies that didn't work, and all this stuff. And you just got to keep on going. And I guess you need somebody to tell you to keep on going. And I didn't. I gave that up, and I became an agent.
You once said that agents in Hollywood are worse than their clients.
I don't think I ever said that.
Really?
I always loved agents. I actually really think agents get a bad rap because, first of all, they're trying to help somebody have a career. That's pretty good. They get paid too little money, 10%, dealing with some of the people I've had to deal with as clients. Not the majority, but a few of them. Most of the clients I had were amazing and became...
You did have some amazing clients.
Yeah,
who did you represent?
I had John Malkovich and Willem Dafoe and Harvey Keitel and Cate Blanchett and so on and so on and so on. And actually, most of them, I'm not mentioning the ones who I didn't like, most of them were really amazing and I had a really great relationship with them. So agents to me, for the most part, I actually really loved, and they were often incredibly, especially American agents, were incredibly entrepreneurial. So they could see 50 different opportunities for their clients. And what I realized quickly as an agent was, and I didn't do it for very long, but what I realized was that actually there were all this downtime for big artists where they weren't making any money. And why not try and figure out a way of them making money? And then I said, okay, let's go to the brands and have them pay them money to do, to wear clothes or to carry handbags. And the reason for it was that the bigger actors, even big stars, even the George Clooney's of the world, they didn't want to do everything. They wanted to do very select things so they had entourages, expenses. It's expensive being a movie star, are really, really expensive because you have to have security and protection. And and now it's not a nice job, by the way. It sounds like a nice job, but actually it's a fucking horrible job because everywhere you go, you can't be just normal. So you have to learn a skin around you that it's a difficult job, a really difficult job. And especially in a world today where you can be so easily shamed, you can be so easily criticized. It's a really tough world we live in. It's a horrible, judgmental, tough world. In those days, it was slightly better. So I think, so I invented this way of them making money so that they could turn down movies. Not so that I could make more money, but so that they could turn down movies and have a more creative path to making the choices they made.
So linking luxury brands with Hollywood stars. What was the first campaign?
They weren't all luxury brands. Some were car brands, or some were, I mean, we would be very selective. I was dealing with some of the greatest performing artists, in the world. So they didn't want to do stuff that was, bad, unless it was in Japan, in which case they'd do anything. That's where that saying, "I'm big in Japan" comes from. That's I can't remember whose song it is, but that comes from that, because we'd be selling whoever it was into Japan and nobody would know. That no longer can happen. So that was the beginning of that part of
a bit lost in translation, a bit like that, doing a whiskey commercial.
Yes. And then I made the fatal mistake of agreeing to head William Morris internationally, and we had 9 offices internationally at that time. And so I left California, a big mistake, in the sense that the movie business was really centered there. So I felt that my artists could work globally, and it would be really easy for me to operate those businesses out of America, and that was completely wrong.
Is that how Finch and Partners came into being?
Then I figured, okay, well, maybe we should try and buy William Morris and join William Morris with a sports agency, which ultimately happened with IMG and William Morris. And I thought William Morris could turn into a producer itself of content. And they said, get out. That's not our business. And then I left and started Finch and Partners and so on and so forth.
Style is something that definitely links all of these different parts of your life and different careers. And I was thinking, you're always very well dressed. I'm dying to know, do you ever wear a tracksuit?
Yeah, man. I mean, I don't purposefully try and be, style conscious. I think people have taken the relaxed dress to the point of ridiculousness now.
Okay, what are the faux pas,
Well,
Charles?
I mean, I was on a plane the other day, and there was this woman who was literally naked on the plane. I mean, naked. And, I mean, literally naked. And I'm thinking to myself, first of all, that's really unpleasant for her, because she's touching the seats of God knows how many other people on board. And it just, I just think the whole idea of wearing shorts with open toes on a plane, and, I mean, for fuck's sake, it's just gone mad. And so I think that, to me, it's not about that. It's about actually how you are and appear is a reflection of how you keep your desk. And if your desk is untidy, your head's probably untidy. And if you don't wash, you probably don't look after yourself or your family. So to me, it's a sort of disciplinary way of behavior. I also had incredibly strong governesses, especially Jamaican governesses, who believed in behaving a certain way and having respect. And so it's more about that than it is about I want to dress a certain way. So frankly, it comes from that belief of a formality. And if you represent people and you're in business, you should dress appropriately, especially if you're giving them advice. Part of my business has always been to give people advice. So consequently, I can't dress like a bum if I'm going to be taken seriously by people who want me to give them proper direction in their careers or in their brands or in their... So that's where it comes from. But yes, I do wear tracksuit, and yes, I do, let it all hang out at different times, but not when I think is appropriate,
Where do you get your suits?
I have an Italian chap who for many years that makes my suits.
In London?
No, I feel bad talking about that. And Paul Smith, I mean, it's a bit... Paul Smith makes amazing things. I'm sure he's really, really good at this. And he's in Naples, Italy, and that's where he I'm a Caribbean boy. So in the Caribbean, I don't know if any of you know the Caribbean, but actually for many, many, many years, especially local people dressed with real pride and dignity. And even the guys that I would go fishing with, my guides, people like that, they always had a real dignity to them. I'm talking about black local people had dignity and spirit. They dressed really well. It was the white people who dressed like bums. But I think I carry with me some of that, like, be respectful, dress correctly, have some faith. It's not right-wing weird shit. It's just like, that's what I sort of believe.
Old school values. You mentioned something there, so style and being a yachtsman.
Yeah.
Is that where, so Charles, last year you started this luxury shoe brand called Equipement de Vie.
I hate the word luxury, frankly, but sorry to
He's technically my editor, so he's just editing me in real time. It's fine.
These shoes are the only shoes that we're not yet selling, but so...
Yeah, are these yours?
These are my shoes. These are Equipement de Vie shoes that we make.
They are.
So
always be closing.
Always be closing. So when you sell classic boats or when you sell fast boats, you have to have grip. And so we decided to make a shoe that had a better grip than the grips that were available. Also, the really good shoe grips cost you about, a Prada grip shoe costs you about 800 pounds. And our grip shoe costs you 140 pounds. So it's a more affordable, well-made, shoe.
And if you're shipwrecked...
You can eat it, baby.
You can eat the shoe.
That's the legend. The legend was, so I said to the shoe designer, listen, if I get shipwrecked in this shoe, could I eat it? He said, yeah, man, you could eat the sole of it and you'll be fine because it's made of some kind of reprocessed, thing. But I wouldn't eat the shoe, okay? Just so we're all cool. So yeah.
And so where is the shoe brand at now? Like.
So my job today, apart from making films or trying to produce films, which is very challenging, is that I have a company that's a marketing and brand investment company called Finch and Partners, which has been going for 28 years now. 28 years, we've invested in many brands in the last 28 years that we either develop in-house, like Chuck's, the restaurant around the corner, or Equipement de Vie or Macintosh raincoats at the time. And we try and build those brands artisanally, so that they can thrive. So part of my work is engineering this type of thing.
If you don't own a yacht, can you still buy the shoes, or do you have to have a boat first?
No, you have to have a boat, yeah. I'm really kidding. You can buy the shoes anytime you want. So you can buy the shoes, yeah.
And there's another project. Is there?
So sailing's quite like making movies, that you have lots of different people you have to rely on, especially racing classic boats. It's really expensive. It demands great attention to detail, and movies are the same way. So I guess I'm very interested in those kind of work and pleasure at the same time.
Do you own boats? Do you have some boats?
I have 2 boats. One is a racing boat at the moment that's just being refitted in Cornwall, and the other is more of an old trawler that was made in Scotland in the 60s.
Speaking of projects, you mentioned Chuck's. Is there a bar opening?
So yes, so I've always been interested in food. So I hope this is not all terribly boring for you all. So I've always been interested in food beyond couscous. So I opened a restaurant here called Chuck's that then I sold, and there are about 6 or 7 of them now, maybe more. And my new restaurant is called Bar Finch, which is around the corner.
Because Harvey Keitel famously called you
Champagne Charlie. There's a reason for that.
Yeah, why is that?
Because my first audition in New York as a young actor, so that method, and if any of you are actors out there, so method was really interesting. Lee Strasberg and group theater and then actor studio were really very dominant in New York, in the New York acting scene, because there was Stella Adler and Strasberg and Sandy Meisner, and there was a really collective group of incredible teachers teaching this Stanislavski method of acting. So it's a formula of acting to bring back emotional feeling. And so I was doing that in New York in Lee's class, and Lee died, and I was looking for work as an actor, and my first big audition was with Harvey Keitel. And he became a really good friend of mine, and there was these amazing, amazing actors around. Pacino, De Niro, Keitel. So I've known these people since I was, a really young kid. And Strasbourg had these Sunday lunches where he'd have all these young actors who were working for him in class, and he'd bring all these big actors who would encourage them and give them insight into the work. And it's almost like a monastic, really serious thing. It's a really, really, my daughter wants to be an actress, and I tell her, listen, I take it really, really seriously. I mean, the craft of acting to me is not a game. It's not about being famous. When I represented actors, I represented the great actors that I could sign, and I think it's a real calling. It's a very, very pure art because you don't need anything else around you. And actually, if you watch the Richard Burton documentary, which is on one of the platforms, and you see Burton, who came from this tiny village in Wales, the use of his voice, his ability to memorize entire Shakespeare plays, every part, not just his part. I really grew up in my work with people like that. I mean, Cate Blanchett can recite Shakespeare sonnets, and as well as 10 different roles, as well as understanding the formation of the craft. So I take it really, really seriously. I really take the work seriously, in the same way that I take the craft of screenwriting really seriously. And I drive everybody crazy because it's rewrite after rewrite after rewrite. That's the process. Right now, the modern philosophy is that get famous, get a lot of people who are followers, turn up to the right social events, and get a job. That's not what it's about. It's nonsense. So I have a really strong view about that. What was the fucking question?
Champagne Charlie.
Oh, yeah. So Harvey used to say to me, listen, for a kid who's broke, you certainly dress well. I like those loafers and stuff. And then he said, so he started calling me Champagne Charlie, because every time I had any money, I would take us all out to dinner, or take everybody out to dinner or lunch or whatever, and order a bottle of champagne. I'd say, Harvey, let's have a bottle of champagne. There you go, somebody crashed it.
You see, we've even come with our own sound effect. It's a film production.
Because my philosophy was kind of like, this is so hard. It's a bit like a Russian philosophy, which is kind of Stanislavski as well, which is like, you could be dead tomorrow. You better live, man.
Bar Finch, Champagne Charlie. What's your poison of choice? Like, what do you go for if you drink? What do you like?
I drink champagne.
That's your.
I like champagne. I like champagne, and I like whiskey, and I have a swimming martini every now and then.
A swimming martini.
A swimming martini is a martini that has the twist is swimming and the olive is on the side.
Huh.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. My other passion, obviously, is literature and publishing. So I published for 5 years a paper called Finch's Quarterly, which was edited by a brilliant guy called Nick Fowkes, which was really funny and really amazing experience. It was very successful. And now we have this magazine, which is in its 14th issue. And it's largely due to the people that I work with who do the real work. Fatima, who's a creative director, and Chris Cotonou, and this amazing team of people that I work with, and that's the magazine. We're very proud of that. So publishing also is a really important part of my life.
Questions for Charles? Open
That's
it up
exhausting.
To you.
I mean, how anybody can keep up with my fucking career, I don't know. But,
Any questions?
I think I've answered.
While you're thinking, I will ask. Yes, Chris.
Yeah, good. Thank God for you, Chris.
After the 3.5 years of putting together this magazine, what's the one lesson that you've learned from the whole experience that is most important to you?
That Chris is irreplaceable.
I think I haven't learned it from this experience of this magazine, but I have learned several things in business. And I think you have to have a very strong and solid idea of what exactly you're doing. You know, why are you doing this and what is it? And the second thing that I think is really something that we always ignore in business is that you need people to sell. Sell, 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 sell. And you can never have enough people selling what you're making, because you can make beautiful things, but nobody sees them. It doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter that you sell a lot. It matters that you sell enough to keep going. And I think repetition is reputation. And you just got to keep on going. And I don't do things for money. I do things for the pleasure of doing them and for the quality and the experience of building something new. I love building things new. I love it. I mean, I just can't stop building things. You know?
But Charles, if your magazine doesn't make money, then does it fold, or does it?
Well, it hasn't yet, but and it's certainly not making a lot of money. So, I think you have to sort of cut your cloth to. Well, there's an expression, I can't remember what it is, but
Cut your cloth accordingly.
yeah. So or tie your jib to your thingy or something. There's something.
That's the one.
Yeah. So I think you have to be sensible. You know, there is a whole school of thought today in business where being sensible is a bad idea. And I meet a lot of those people, you know, who are really rich and really powerful. I think we live in an oligarchy today, which we all should be very aware of and should all fight against, where the rich have too much dominance in politics and too much dominance in every part of our lives, more and more dominance. And so I'm very anti this thing being fueled by money in the future that will suddenly happen, that doesn't matter if you've got long losses for a long time. Now, if Jeff Bezos was sitting here, he would say, well, you're wrong, because they had losses for decades until it exploded. But that's different, because he had an arithmetic formula. So it's a different situation. He's different, because he's figuring out we need to invest this amount to get this amount of people to buy it. So it's infrastructural investment. You can lose money if you're investing infrastructurally to grow. That's a totally different thing. But there are lots of businesses today which are not sound. AI may be one of them, by the way. And we're going to have a fierce adjustment for AI, which we've had all week. You know, huge amounts of money have been written off now in the AI markets, or in the markets because of AI. And that's a different philosophy, which is like, don't worry, we'll build it up. 1 in 50 will make it, and the others will just disappear, and people will lose countless amounts of money. Fine, let them go along that process. My businesses have always been built like a farmer. The magazine has to wash its face. We have to have enough advertising. We can't do these events unless we have somebody sponsoring. Can Finch and Partners afford to do this, sponsor this, and what's the purpose of it? So we run these. So I personally, I think it's true if you speak to my colleagues, they run the businesses that they work on in the same philosophy that I have. The responsibility of old-fashioned business engineering, where you're concerned with making profit, is how I run my businesses. And that may not be chic, and that may not be of its currency, but my business has been going for 28 years. And all around me, I've seen businesses collapse. Big businesses, small business. I see one of my financial guys in the back there, and he has to suffer this. How are we going to do this?
Yeah.
And so it's the same philosophy. You know, it's an old-fashioned, tangible view to business. That doesn't mean to say that I'm not. Is it possible that I would go out of business? Of course it is. Times are changing so rapidly. The loyalty happening between businesses is very, very, very thin on the air. Brands can change their view and not support you.
You mentioned old-fashioned values and tangible things. Can we just, because I'm not sure everyone will know, the title of A Rabbit's Foot, where does it come from?
Well, it's become quite controversial in a weird way, because Hemingway is a controversial character. But I don't think he really was a controversial. So he was a big spirited guy. But he suffered from enormous anxiety, which is very unknown. And he writes about that in A Movable Feast, which is his book about being in Paris and trying to make it, and so on and so forth. So in his pocket, he carried a rabbit's foot, which many people did for luck. and he carried it to help him with his anxiety. And he used to wear these holes in all of his pockets of his suits from him constantly playing with a rabbit's foot. So when I started the idea of a rabbit's foot with this crew of bandits, you know, I wanted to build a magazine initially that was quite small in format, that could go into your pocket. And there would be a place that you could lose yourself. Because I think books actually are a way of, if you do nothing else and you just read, you learn so much, and it's so inexpensive to read. You can just read and learn so much. So I wanted something that was very literary in its aspect. Of course, Fatima has brought a modernity to it. Her modernity is quite like my 1950s modernity. So it's a classical modernity. But that was the idea behind it, that it could be something that you could use as a book to keep in your pocket and keep on your desk and read. And it's gone beyond the magazine now. I think we had 3.7 million, I always invent these numbers, but there's like 3.7 million people went online the other day. And you know, it's correct. So we had 3.7 million people.
Lauren, head of partnerships, says that number is correct.
So 3.7 million people went and read, and you get these spikes, people really interested in stories that tell not only about film, by the way, also about art, culture, and life.
You know, it's funny, it occurred to me today that, so the rabbit's foot is a lucky symbol, and it's Hemingway, and of course it's the title of the magazine. Rabbits are also a lucky symbol for Paul Smith. And when we talked about this, you pulled something out of the breast pocket of your jacket. Have you got it today?
Oh, you mean my gold rabbit?
Yeah.
I do have a gold rabbit. Don't listen, if anybody's listening and want to mug me, don't, because I'm really tough. So yeah, Susie Murphy made me this little gold rabbit here. You see the little gold rabbit? And you see the rabbit, it's like a crouching rabbit. And there's my foot.
And was that after the magazine?
Yeah.
Yeah. What else do you have any other lucky symbols or things you keep?
None I'm going to tell you about.
Do we have any? We should probably wrap up in a second. Any questions?
John, if you had to choose one of the films you've done in the last 40 years and gone with that only, what would it be?
So the question is, if you had to choose any of the one things that you've done in the last 40 years and stick to that one, what would it be?
You know, directing movies is the most incredible job. I mean, especially if you're good at it, because you get to design and tell a story, you get to interpret it on film, it can have huge impact in the currency of conversation, social currency. It is amazing fun. It's hectic, but it's just fabulous. Producing movies is a big pain in the ass, and I think publishing is also amazing. Those two things really stick to me. I wasn't born as somebody who could, I didn't sort of come out the womb to be a polymath. It wasn't my big plan to like, oh, let's do 10 different things. It was through necessity that I had to constantly adapt and contrive to make other businesses happen so that I could have freedom and independence. And so that's why I do all these things, is to be free, to not have a boss. I like that.
Any other questions? No?
I've got lots, but I'll ask him later.
There you go, my two friends ask you a question.
Ask him over a glass of champagne. Exactly. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening, everybody.